recording ready within the next day or so. My name's Vicky Saunders, and I am very excited to be presenting our 5th webinar in the Athlete Pathway webinar series. Our topic today is Mental Toolkit, and our special guest is Joanne Love. And Joanne's going to be talking about how to underpin your athlete's pathway in a way that gives them the ability to develop self-awareness and confidence. So this is in relation to athlete brand. This is about sponsorship. This is about them becoming public speakers and all of those other topics that we're including in the Athlete Pathway series. The Mental Toolkit is that foundation that helps them go on that journey. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we all meet all around the world and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. For most of you, you know a little bit about us now. You've been joining these webinars, or we've worked together. You know, there's a lot of our clients that are joining these sessions. For those that don't know about us, the Brand Builders is a company who works all around the world. We work with sports organizations and their athletes. We work with corporate teams. We work with businesses who are seeking sponsorship or investing in sponsorship. And most of all, we help develop individuals and organizations in ways that allow them to achieve their goals, their ambitions, their purpose in a way that's grounded in who they are, what they care about, their values, their beliefs. And as much as we teach that, that's how we operate as an organization. So when the COVID pandemic started this year, we immediately looked for ways that we could be of service to the industry or the industries that have allowed us to flourish and grow as a business. So this webinar series is part of that. We're providing education for the people who guide and educate athletes in their journey. So these webinars aren't education for athletes, they're for the people who support athletes. It's the kind of stuff you should know and you'd want to know to be able to point your athletes in the right direction or potentially engage with us for further education for your athletes. What I think you'll find through all of these webinars is that we truly care about what we do. This isn't just about ticking a box, it's about helping athletes in their lives, helping people in their lives and their journeys in sport, in work, and beyond. So I'm going to pass over to Joanne Love now, and I'm actually really looking forward to this presentation. I know that Joanne is very passionate about the work that she does, and I believe that this is something so fundamental for all of the athletes, whether they're seeking sponsorship or whether they're just wanting to grow their brand for personal reasons. This is the stuff that's going to help them do that. Thanks, Jo. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicky, for having me on the webinar series, and I am very excited to be delivering this today. And I think this year has just opened our eyes to how important mental skills are. So the agenda for today is why they are important, the top 3 skills that I think all athletes need, and how we can support our athletes going forward. And finally, there'll be a question and answer session right at the end. Just before we get going, I just want to give you a little bit about my background. So I was a swimming coach, and it was in the early 2000s, 2002 actually, where I had a huge failure with one of my athletes who was probably going to be a top level athlete, but he walked into the pool one day and he said, "I can't swim, the water's too blue." I'm like, "What do you mean you can't swim today? The water's too blue." And he just, "No, can't swim," all over. And that was his very first opportunity to make an Australian team and swim at an international level. And from then on, he just went downhill. But what it did to me is it awakened me to the fact that I didn't know enough about the mental skills side of things to help him. So I went back to university, studied psychology, and I basically haven't stopped since. And I now recognise the importance of mental skills in part of our learning, whether it's for building your brand or just personal life. And the toolbox is something we should all have in our back pocket. And we've probably all experienced this roller coaster of emotions. I'm B. I'm the one on the left-hand side. I'm shocking. I throw up if I get on a roller coaster. But for our athletes, they're experiencing all these roller coaster emotions every day. Right at the very top, there can be happiness, euphoria, but right at the bottom, it can be desperation or angriness, depending on how they perform and where they are in their journey. And whether it's being part of building their brand or whether it's performing themselves, it's these issues that can affect them long term and cause issues to their mental health. So, you know, this year's all been about COVID. We're told to wash our hands, keep our distance, but to stop worrying. Who's teaching us how to stop worrying? We've been taught how to wash our hands correctly. We've been taught that we must maintain a certain distance from other people, but nobody's saying how we fix our worries. And these are some of the issues that we have with our athletes. Athletes that aren't performing how they like. They might do a great job in training, but get behind the block ready to swim, for example, and just can't do it, like in the case of my athlete. But the same thing goes for building a brand. You want sponsorship. Have you got the courage to pick up the phone and move forward? What's the worries behind it? So we move on. There's also the huge wins that they can experience. But what happens the next day? They have a post-win blue. You know, they've won a phenomenal event. They've taken out a marathon, and the next day they're depressed and wanting to quit. Why is that so? It all comes back to the mental toolbox and our neurotransmitters in our brain. And what I'm about is about neuroscience and psychology and applying that so our athletes can perform to the best of their ability, whether it's about building their brand, and as I said, all behind the block. And I believe that performance and well-being go hand in hand. And when we approach it and we take it full on, that's when we're going to be a master at it. And we've got to have awareness of those little triggers that set us off, that make us perform well, make us perform bad, help us to reach out and show who we really are in our brand, or fail if we do nothing and we aren't aware of who we are and what we are. And probably a great example of that for the Australians in our crowd, probably all remember Lay Down Sally. Now, Lay Down Sally is a perfect example of an athlete who was a failure. So back in 2004 at the Athens Olympics, Australia were coming fourth. They were in prime position. They were just starting to make their move on the rest of the field. They were expected to take out the competition, and Sally laid down, which made everybody in the boat stop rowing. And of course, they come last. But the biggest thing is what they didn't know was that she hadn't done this once before, because she did it in 2002 at a top level competition, but she had done it numerous times. Unfortunately, and I found out she'd actually done it 8 times in the past. So why wasn't anybody doing anything to help her? Putting her in a boat just increases the anxiety level, but there was nobody there helping her. So we don't want our athletes to be a failure, whether it's, as I said, picking up the phone to ask for sponsorship, putting our personality out there on the line. We want them to be a master. Just stuck on a slide, my apologies. So I've got a little poll going, and I want you to tell me what this lady is famous for. Is she A ballerina, B, track and field athlete, C, basketball player, D, boxer? So if you'd like to vote. Nobody can see your answer, so you don't need to worry. Just give it another 15 seconds or so for you to lodge your votes. Okay, so that's what the final score was. She's in fact a ballet dancer. And for those Americans, I hope we've got a few Americans in the audience today. You probably know her. This is Misty Copeland. She's America's very first Black prima donna ballerina. So what we do is, and I'll just share those results. So we had a lot of people pick track and field and some pick boxing. And I'm going to explain why I asked this question. right now, and hopefully the poll's gone away for you. So there was a gentleman named Rosenthal who went into a school and he said, I'm going to do a test of all the students in the class today, and just a general IQ test. So he gave the students the IQ test and he went away and he picked 5 students who scored in the middle of the field. And he went back to the teacher in that classroom and he said to the teacher, you have 5 students here that are going to be absolute superstars, leaders of the future. They're going to make world-changing changes throughout, the organisations. They're going to be our next best thing in the world. At the end of the year, he went back to that classroom and he did another IQ test. And what he found from the results of those tests, that those 5 students performed 25% better than anybody else in the class. And his theory was that we praise people based on our expectations. And it became Rosenthal's theory, as in the name. And those 3 assumptions that we make about people are: 1, their psychological makeup; 2, their physical makeup, which is why I asked the question about Misty Copeland. A lot of people looked at her and went, track and field athlete. But when in fact she's a ballerina, she doesn't even look like a ballerina. A lot of people pick boxing in Australia when I just do it to Australian organisations, which is quite interesting. And the very last one is past results. So those 3 Ps again, a psychological makeup, physical makeup, and past performances. And what we do is we give differential treatment according to those expectations. And then the athlete picks up on those expectations and they complete that self-fulfilling prophecy of performing to that. So like those students in the classroom, the teacher unwittingly gave them more praise and they of course perform better. So what happens with these 3 Ps is we're either more attentive or we avoid them, we encourage them more or we neglect them, we provide more or fewer opportunities. So when you're looking at your athletes, just be conscious of this. And what they've studied even further is that there's 1 or 2 coaches in the world who praise people equally. And this lovely photo is John Wooden, famous basketball coach in America. And they tested him and they found that he praised everybody in his team equally. And this was at a stage when he was coaching, when black segregation was just coming into basketball teams, and the athletes love him still. And this is a lovely photo of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with John Wooden. So how we think about our athletes and the assumptions we jump to can affect them long term. So it's you as a coach, a manager, a supporter, it's very important what you're saying and how you're saying to people. Now we're going to move into the 3 areas that I believe are really important for athletes. And the first one is their focus. So no 2 athletes are the same. Just like that roller coaster at the beginning, everybody perceives focus differently. But one athlete might need to shut down and keep the noise out. Another needs to build on the noise. But a lot of people, a lot of supporters, a lot of managers don't understand how this focus affects their athletes. And they'll, I hear phrases like they weren't focused enough because they were jumping around like Usain Bolt, or, if they've lost a race, where in fact that's not true. So what I want to do is I want to show you a little video, and I want you to focus on the blue car in the middle of the screen.
To test just how much attention the attention-stealing design of the new Skoda Fabia actually steals, we left one parked on this ordinary road in West London. We wanted to see if its sharp crystalline shapes bold lines and lower, wider profile would attract the desired level of attention. Will the 17-inch black alloy wheels stop passers-by in their tracks? Will the angular headlights attract the attention of other road users? Will a crowd gather to check out its fresh, sporty look? Well, not quite. But did the attention-stealing design distract you from noticing that the entire street has been changing right before your very eyes? Don't believe us? Have another look. Did you spot the van changing to a taxi? How about the scooter changing to a pair of bicycles? Or the lady holding a pig? let alone the fact that the entire street is now completely different. Didn't think so.
So I've just got another poll for you to do. So, oh, sorry. Technology, great when it works. So I want to know, did you see all of the changes, some of the changes, or none of the changes? I must say the very first time I did this, I saw none of the changes.
While you guys are doing the poll, Joe, there's a grey box sort of to the right-hand side of our screen. I wonder if it's something, yeah, just where your arrow is right now, if you can close that.
Is that better?
A little bit better.
I can't get rid of it totally, Vicky.
That's okay. That's better.
I've moved it right up the top. Is that better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
I'll just give you 10 more seconds to finish off the poll. Okay. So, yeah, a few like me didn't see any of the changes whatsoever, and other people saw some of them. But interestingly, not one saw all the changes. So that's what we call our RAS taking control. So our RAS is our reticulating activating system. So when something's important to us, we'll take note of it. When it's not important to us, then we don't see those bits and pieces. It's like a Google filter in our brain that just shows up what we want to see. But for athletes, it also becomes our undoing. So there's this lovely Japanese concept of san-shen, and I hope I pronounce that right if we've got any Japanese speakers in the audience. And it's about our final mind, and it's about driving to finish off, and we become laser focused, and golfers are really known for having this laser focus, so they can finish off and putt right to the end and finish off the 18 holes. But what happens is it becomes our undoing. So for an athlete, they think that they're showing their brand to the world, but because of this laser focus, it becomes very narrow, and they aren't willing to open themselves up to opportunities or really show what their personality is about. So it does have how they focus, not only on performance on the track, but also in their branding and showing themselves to the world. The second point I want to make is self-talk. Unfortunately, this is probably one of the biggest impacts on athletes, the way they speak to themselves, their inner critic, what they have to say and how they say it. And, you know, it's probably the biggest impact on their sporting career is this point. So it's worthwhile taking note of how people speak to themselves and what they're doing, and we can reframe it, we can change it. And again, I hear all these people, I'm not good enough, I can't do that, I'm not willing to do it. And we see that you can show up in different parts of how they speak as well. I've got butterflies in my stomach, my heart's just not in it anymore, I'm overthinking this. And when these three things don't align, that's when they start talking even more negative about what they're doing. And Michael Phelps is a great example of this. And when it becomes overwhelming, that's when it goes into, unfortunately, a bad state of depression. So he wanted to be seen as mentally tough. By him speaking out and saying something meant that he wasn't mentally tough. And that didn't align, it didn't go together. There was that doubt there, and that just increased, and then he started to respond to it, and unfortunately the consequences weren't great. So our actions have to be all aligned. And half the reason is, if I ask you not to look at the elephant, what do? We stare at that elephant, it's the first thing you look at. So what we've got to be doing is trying to reframe. We can't get rid of this self-doubt. It's going to be there forever, and it has a purpose. It helps to monitor our behaviour, and it helps us from doing wrongs. So it's going to be there. But what we need to do is we need to nurture and build our inner nurturer. So get rid of our inner critic, or not get rid of it, but try and reduce its impact and build our inner nurturer. So what can we do? We can turn things around. I can't do this, add a yet to the end. It sounds a lot better than I can't do it. If you say I can't do it yet, so it means you're willing to do it. The other thing is talk to yourself like your best friend. Now, you don't put your best friend down and say, that's garbage, that's terrible, you're shocking. What we need to do is we need to, talk to ourselves like best friend. Hey, you did that well done, good job. Encourage that inner nurturer to come out. And the last one is, put it back in its place. When it starts to rise, be firm with it. Treat it like a toddler. Hey, I've had enough. Behave yourself. I'm taking over now. We've got a job to do. Let's get it done. So just remember those points about self-talk. And the last one I want to bring up is the Batman effect. So what they've found is when we talk to ourselves in first person, I'm going to do this, we don't have a lot of confidence. When we talk to ourselves in the third person, as in, Joanne, you're going to do this now, we find that our performances are better. But when we talk to ourselves like a superhero, so what would Superman or what would Batman do in this case, our performances skyrocket. So when you're a bit troubled and you're a bit worried about getting started and that self-doubt's starting to take effect, ask yourself, what would Batman do? And that's called the Batman effect. And the 3 tips with that is listen to what you're saying in your head, be mindful about it. So even now, me just speaking about it and you talking to your athletes about it is listen to what they're saying. If they're saying, hey, I don't want to put myself out there and label my brand, challenge them. How can they change it? How can they turn it into the positive rather than negative to shift their thoughts? And the very last topic is identity. And this is a really important one. So many people get their validation by the number of likes on social media, where to me, they're all just vanity metrics. What you want to do is you want to convert it. So how many likes you get is not how good your brand is, it's the conversion. And we tie ourselves up in these validations. And, with our athletes, they build their identity and their self-worth on their performances, which is not the right thing to do. What they need to do is they need to understand what their values are, and the brand builders help people identify those values and make them work for them. So they follow through with them. They're important. It's really important if you're going to build a brand. So everything with athletes is a conscious choice. Will they go to training or will they stay home and watch a movie? The decisions they make are top down, meaning they are guided by what's important to them and their subconscious needs and their responsibility for their actions. And these decisions are a reflection of those values and those beliefs. And they're always directed towards a specific purpose. So what do they want out of their brand? So that's where they've got to direct it. But sometimes as a coach, a manager, supporter, we can influence those athletes. We might see a little bit of talent in them and push them down a path that they don't want to go, or suggest that their goals are bigger than what they want to do. And unfortunately for athletes, their ego gets hijacked. Everybody's got an ego, but the younger you are, the harder it is to control that ego, and it can block reality and it becomes your enemy. So, we don't want our athletes to be rely on the validation of their success to perform, to understand what their identity is. We want them to believe in their own identity. So what happens with these athletes that their ego takes over is they become impressionable. They overestimate their abilities and their worth, and they underestimate the effort and the skill that's required, the hard work that's required to make it happen. And then it becomes harder for them to achieve what they want. They need enticements. They aren't self-motivated like those who believe in their own values. And when they don't get those entitlements or things don't go how they like, they become very fragile. Whereas we want them to align with their own values so they're resilient. And we don't want them making excuses. We want them solution-driven so that in the long run, they're so much more happier. So why does all this matter? And why is the mental toolbox so important? And you as the supporter, you as the manager, the coach, the faculty head, why is it important? because we put a lot of time into training our athletes. We work on their fueling their tank, building up conditioning, and then we work on their technique, putting all the skills together. But you know, we don't have self-driving cars now, so it's really important that we have a brain sitting in the front seat, driving that car, knowing where it wants to go. And we have a responsibility to put a protective ring around our athletes so that they're mentally sound no matter what they do, so that they're not knocked for a six when they get trolled on social media. They're going into building a brand and making it work for them so that they're ready to go and they can handle all those knocks and aware of the triggers that happen so they can move forward and perform at their best, whether it's building a brand or on the field. And that's why mindsets matters. So thank you very much for my quick chat today. And now if there's any questions.
Well, I might actually just jump in. I think we haven't got any questions come through yet, but hopefully people can just now sort of percolate what they've been listening to and start typing their questions in the Q&A section. Everything that you said, like I just naturally relate back to brand and you know, that athlete, the holistic pathway of an athlete. What we've been talking about over the last few weeks, I know you've seen some of the sessions, Joe, is presentation skills. So athletes doing public speaking or speaking with the media, doing social media, growing their brand and maybe pursuing a career or sponsorship or being an entrepreneur. And all of that stuff, you know, there's different measures. Like you said, there's that external measure of success, which is how many likes, or did you get the job, or did you get sponsorship? You know, there's that external stuff, which is important. But I think what you've touched on here that's really important is, what if they don't get those external, you know, successes? What happens on the inside? Do they then think, well, I'm not worth anything, I'm a failure? Or do they say, that's okay, I know who I am, I know what I'm doing, I feel like I'm on the right journey? And even just going through the process, you know, making those attempts can actually be fulfilling for them. So I think this helps us reframe the athlete journey in a positive way, really. It allows us to give them the tools to deal with the good and the bad.
Exactly. Yeah, very much so.
So we've got a question from Josh Strahl, and he's asked, how can an athlete build mental endurance? Now, Josh is a very, very long distance runner, many kilometers, like, I don't know, 50, 100 at a time. And so I guess mental endurance for him might be about those events. But I think in the context of our webinars, let's talk about it more holistically. So how can an athlete build mental endurance? It might be that your journey as an athlete feels like a marathon, you know, years and years of doing this stuff.
So to me, I really believe that this is an important component of training, and it should start when an athlete starts competing. They should be building mental skills from that day. So whether it's, you know, starting off very easy with building a mantra, you know, turning that self-talk into a positive statement. And Muhammad Ali, we all know, was a great example of this. Now, his float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, was so that he remembered to keep light on his feet, yet punch really hard. So a lot of his mantras are about performing better. So if we can start our journey off from day one with little tips like that can help improve performance, and just keep building and building and building our toolbox, we're going to have better, stronger athletes, and athletes that you know, can experience downfalls and know how to pick themselves up and get back on their feet again. Athletes that are prepared to see some obstacles and go through it rather than try and avoid it. So that's what we want. And that's going to build a stronger, not only resilient athlete, but, you know, it is a mental endurance in itself. And we don't go out and start training and expect to perform really well the next day. It takes time. It takes time to build skills, and the mental tools take just as much time.
Yeah, and I love those little mantras. They can really help us if we identify them in moments of clarity and calm. they can help us in those moments of uncertainty and stress. And, you know, there's one that we always tell athletes when they're seeking sponsorship, which is be grateful for the no's. Like when a company says, no, we're not going to sponsor you, because it's clearing the pathway towards the yes. It's putting aside the ones that aren't right for you for whatever reason and keeping you free and open for the opportunities that are right for you. So, and I've seen that, you know, really helps athletes go, oh, good, they said no. Okay, good, I'm getting close to yes. We've got a question. Oh, sorry.
No, they're a very important thing to know their, you know, the expectations of others. If they know their values, you know, they can say no to things with, you know, confidence rather than, you know, having to do what others want them to do, what they don't want to do. So that's a very important point as well.
It is. We've got a question from Jared Knight. What advice would you give to an athlete to beat the morning internal battle to get out and get going to practice? I found everyone has those days, and what tools do you perhaps recommend to always win that battle? So again, we're going to contextualize this not just into sport, but in the life of an athlete. So more broadly, those days or those moments where they just can't get started and they don't want to face the day ahead. You know, there might be a particular, you know, challenge that they've got. They might know that they've got to do a social media post or a media interview. It could be training, but it's that holistic thing. So what's the advice that you'd give to help athletes with that battle?
So there's lots of reasons for this phenomena, but I'm going to go down the goal path. So my background is in goals, and I've got a lot of research done in goals, and we found that really clear, precise goals are what keep people happy and directed. Whereas unclear goals, they lose the plot, they don't know how to get there. In fact, we don't even believe SMART goals. So our research shows that SMART goals leave athletes wanting, because the distance between where they are and where they've got to get to is not fulfilled. It's so far off, they can't see how to get there. So we do what we call effective goal setting, and that's part of the journey, and knowing what the plan is and having that stimulation all the time with goals just keeps them motivated every day to get what they're doing. And it's also backed by their values again. So, you know, their values and their why, understanding why they're doing it. And a lot of athletes, you know, especially if they're driven by parents or coaches, hey, you're good at this, keep going. Their why is not great, and then they lose the plot. Whereas those athletes with very strong why they're doing this are more focused on getting going. But yeah, we all have those days where it's hard to get out of bed. What is your backup strategy? So a great backup strategy is if and then. You know, you're going to have days where you're sick and you can't go training, or days that you're just not capable of having an interview. What's your backup strategy? If I do this, you know, you can make a deal with yourself. If I do this, then I will do that. So have a backup strategy, and that's really, really important in an athlete and everyday person. We don't want to get out of bed some days. It's hard.
Yeah, and I think it ties in. I'm not sure if you remember it, Jo, but I think in one of the first or second webinars that we did in this series, we talked, it was the first one, it was around sponsorship and endorsements. We talked about the 4 parallel pathways of an athlete that on their journey through sport, there's 4 main aspects of their journey. There's their performance, which is everything to do with sport, training, competition, mindset, everything to do with sport. The next down is their professional pathway, so education, employment, career. Then it's their personal pathway, so their family, their friendships, their relationship with themselves. And then it's their passion pathway, which could or could, you know, it might not be their sport, it could be something completely unrelated. And so that's why that sort of model, that concept is so important for athletes and their support people to know about. Because if all they're focused on is performance, and that's all they're focusing on, that's their only goal, it's their only reason for getting out of bed in the morning, that might not be enough. If there's other things at play, and like you say, they've got those goals, that bigger picture, their purpose could be to end world hunger. How they do that is what they do in all of those pathways. So if you know that if you get out of bed and you go do that training session or you go do that interview, that it's contributing towards your big goal of life, your purpose in the world, I believe that will help you get out of bed. I know it does for me.
Yeah, yeah. And the other time, sometimes it's like I spoke about before, it's your inner critic, that self-talk, that negative self-talk that goes on. You know, I'm not good enough anyway. I'm not the best at what I should be. So, you know, there's 4 quick questions that, you know, I always ask around this is, you know, what do you like about yourself? We very rarely ask that question. We always pick out all our negative faults. So what do we like about ourselves? You know, what would you say to your, and I brought this one up before, what would you say to your friend about you? You know, for me, it'd be, hey, I like your hair today, it's straight. You know, something a friend would say to you.
I did say that. I did say that an hour ago.
Yeah. So,
Good friend.
but do we do it to ourselves? No, we always go, oh, we go the opposite. Oh, there's a bit of a frizz out there. I need to fix it up, instead of going, hey, my friend just told me my hair's nice and straight. But, you know, I'm talking here on the surface, but, you know,
Yeah.
what about us inside? You know, what do we do well? What do our friends like about us? We're always there for them, or we always, you know, compliment them, but we very rarely acknowledge that. So that's a question to ask yourself. And how do you show yourself that you're actually worthy? So this is a really hard question. How do you show that you are worthy of being here and doing what you're doing? Again, when we have that self-doubt, and that's negative inner critic, we think about ourselves along the lines of, you know, first of all, wanting the validation, and then secondly, we want other people to acknowledge us for our sport and not the other things that we do in life. And that's wrong. And we need to recognise those other things that we do well. You know, you might be a great student in maths, or you might be a great speaker. Do we ever recognise those things? When we're very elite in sport, it's always the sport. So you need to ask your question, what else am I worth? You know, what am I good at away from sport? And start recognising those abilities, because sport, even though like Josh goes for, you know, a fair time into his life, it's only a small proportion of his life. It's only a small part of his day. It's not the other 22 hours of his day. And the last one is, you know, what's the healthy boundaries that you have? Do you have limits? You know, you being pushed to do things that you don't want to do? What are your boundaries? So just recognising those, and that just helps keep that identity strong, and also stops that inner critic in the morning when you know those things. It's just gives you that little lift, helps you get out of bed. You know, question to ask yourself every morning.
Thank you, Jo. I think this is a much more sort of, I guess, in-depth discussion than some of the other topics that we have in this series, but it's important that we have this. You know, we don't want to be an organisation that tell athletes to go and speak publicly and grow their brand and do this and that, and then, like you say, they have those meltdowns. The water in the pool's too blue. And I think I know what he means. He's probably just sick of looking at that water day in, day out, and he's just doesn't want to look at it. So I really think, sorry, my chihuahua's going a little bit mental in the background. I really think that this is something that must be part of any journey that athletes go on in their, you know, their pathway education, which is why, you know, we work with you and why we've brought you in to do this webinar. What I'll do in a second, I'm just going to share what we do in terms of athlete education. So I've sent a link for everyone there. You can have a look and you can see some of the things that Jo teaches in her sessions with us. So that's the end of today's presentation. We're going to have a quick look now at the next session that we're going to have in a couple of weeks, which is on the next slide. And our special guest is Chantel Thompson. Chantel is an amazing woman. She's an Indigenous athlete. She's a world champion. She's an educator, and she's a mother of 3. She's one of the people that I admire most in sport and in life, in the way that she's been able to embrace and harness her Indigenous culture, bring it to the forefront, but not just talking it, living it, showing it and sharing it. And we're very, very privileged to have Chantel sharing on how athletes can capture and convey their story for purpose. She brings learnings and insights into her culture, her history of storytelling as an Indigenous woman. Indigenous Australians have an oral history. It's not written down. So storytelling is fundamental to their culture. And we're very, very lucky to have her sharing on that in a couple of weeks' time. And that will bring us to the end of our 6-part webinar series. Each one of the webinars has been recorded, and we'll send the recording to each of you straight after, within a day or so of this session. We'll also be sharing tip sheets, and we welcome you to ask questions, have a chat with us, share what's going on in your world with your athletes, and to continue this journey with us beyond the webinars. It's been a privilege to have people from all around the world joining in, and I think it's a great learning space for all of us. So while we might be the experts on Athlete Pathway, you're all experts on your different areas, and we really look forward to connecting with you. So that's all from us today. Joe, thank you ever so much. I'm really grateful that you came in and shared those insights with us. And yeah, I think it's going to be really, really helpful for a lot of the people watching and their athletes.
Thanks, Vicky, for having me.
Lovely. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a lovely day wherever you are.